Stop quite talking here.
Everyone's coming in.
Ah, should I plug it in?
Struggling with it.
She doesn't have Zoom loaded.
Don't you load Zoom on it?
Thank you.
You back to Nick?
Ah, that's a lot better. Done. Thank you very much. Done.
So Aaron, I'm going to go off now. Just let me wait for the chief to come back.
It's loud.
Okay.
All the panelists, please mute
Thank you so
yourself.
much for doing this. I'm going off now.
No, they're getting other people on at the moment.
We're going to start momentarily. A few more people are joining, and then we will begin. Welcome, everybody, to the Siyum Harambam. And in a moment, I'll explain what we're doing here tonight. Tonight's program is dedicated to the memory of Selwyn Lifshitz, Zalman ben Leib Yisrael. Maimonides, a 12th century sage, one of the most prolific writers in Jewish history and one of the greatest sages, wrote many books. And his impact is left in every area of life. One of the big books he wrote, some people will say his magnum opus, the greatest of all his books, is a set of books called Mishnah Torah, which he introduces this set of books the following. He says, all you need to know Judaism, at least for his time, is to know the 5 books of Moses and his book. And with that, you know Judaism, because literally he covers every single law in every scenario. Now, there are many different books of laws. There's books like called the Shulchan Aruch and others, but most of them only cater to the laws that are relevant in the time that they were written. So for example, most Jewish books that we know are post-temple era. They were written in the last 2,000 years after the temple's destruction. And therefore, laws of the temple are not there. And laws of purity and impurity that were really dominant in the time of the temple are not there. Maimonides decided to embrace Kol HaTorah Kula, the entire Torah. And he authored this book, which has many, many chapters, over 1,000 chapters of learning. Now, in 1984, the Lubavitcher Rebbe introduced the idea. It was about April time, in the month of Nisan, he introduced the idea that to bring unity amongst Jews, we should all be learning the same thing, something that can be understood by everybody. There's many studies that Jews do around the world, but many of them are kind of exclusive based on knowledge of people. But the Rebbe said the laws of Maimonides we can all do together as one unit. Why? Because we could do different standards, but at the same time, we'll all be together. And he created a 3-tier program. Tier number 1, I guess the highest program, is to do 3 chapters a day. 3 chapters, which means you will finish all the learning in 339 days. So every 339 days, just under a year, we complete. The other option is to not do 3 chapters a day, to do 1 chapter a day, and then it's just over 1,000. 1,000 days, 3 years. And then there's the other option, which is by far the most popular, and that is Sefer HaMitzvot, to do one of the 613 mitzvahs a day, one or two, a few, but basically follow the same cycle as 3 chapters, but instead of going into all the depth, just the basic principle, what is the mitzvah of the day? What are the 2 mitzvahs of the day? I could tell you just in the last few days, hundreds and hundreds, close to 1,000 people that I know have signed up to be part of this last tier of doing Sefer HaMitzvot, as well as other tiers as well. Now, Maimonides for me personally, I haven't introduced myself, so I'll just introduce myself now. My name is Rabbi Levi Yatson from Linksfield Shul. For me personally, it's a very strong memory. My dad, may he rest in peace, was extremely passionate about this campaign on Maimonides, so much so the Rebbe one time called him up in a setting, in a Farbrengen, where a lot of people were there together, and the Rebbe says, I want the emissary of my father-in-law, referring to the previous Rebbe, I want the emissary of my father-in-law who takes care of teaching Maimonides to get up. And nobody knew who he was talking about till the Rebbe pointed to my father, because my father at that time was making audios and tapes and sending out English translations of the chapters. This was in the mid-'80s. And ever since then, Maimonides was a very, very strong part of my home. My father was learning Rambam every single day, often fall asleep on it, but the memory of Rambam was always there. And therefore, once I came of age and I was able to start doing Rambam, I followed in his footsteps and I tried to do the 3rd chapter, 3 chapters a day. And tonight, actually, I'm finishing, I believe, my 10th or 11th cycle that, thank God, I haven't broken. And this idea of all Jews coming together and united is really what we're here tonight. And interesting, this year, it's not only the conclusion of the 1-year cycle, it's also the conclusion of the 3-year cycle. Because we've been doing this for 36 times already, and now we are finished the 12th cycle of 3. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce what we're going to be doing tonight. We're going to be hearing from a surprise guest in just a moment, followed by Sean Mattinson, Tanya Fialkov, Jeff Seidel, Professor Zeffert, and Rabbi Levi Silman. But before that, I want to introduce somebody who's a last-minute addition, but an absolute privilege, the Chief Rabbi Goldstein, Chief Rabbi from South Africa, to share his words about this campaign and what it means to him. Chief Rabbi, b'vakasha.
Thank you, Rabbi Avtzon, and it's so beautiful to hear about your personal family connection to the Rambam and to the Rebbe's call for people to learn it together in unison, which is such an important dimension of unity and really connection to Torah learning. And I also want to just pay tribute to Rabbi Masinta for his vision and drive in putting this together and bringing us all together. And so it's really an honor to be able to share a few words at the opening of this and to encourage as many people as possible to go out and to commit to this idea of learning Rambam every day. Because when we say about learning Rambam every day, it means learning Torah every day. And I think what is so special about it is that daily learning, a day should not go by where we don't learn something new and fresh. Because the only way that we stay inspired and connected to Hashem is through daily learning of Torah. And the Rambam's writings, which is essentially a summary and a crystallization of all of Torah, is such a wonderful way to do that and to give expression to that. And there's a verse which says that a kiner mitzvah Torah, or that the mitzvah is a lamp and the Torah is light. And the Talmud says on that a mitzvah, that this world is like a dark forest. And at times it can be confusing and dangerous and filled with a lot of uncertainty. And I suppose, friends, in a way, in this corona world that we're living in, the world does feel a bit like a dark forest at the moment. And we're trying to find our way out of it. And where is our source of light? Our source of light is the Torah that Hashem gave us. But the Talmud says, quoting from this verse, when we do a mitzvah that gives us light, it's like a torch in the dark of the forest. But when we learn Torah, the Talmud says that's like the sun rising in the morning and the forest being signposted, and you can find your way and you have direction. And that for us is the incredible gift. When we learn Torah, we have access to God's wisdom, to Hashem's wisdom and his light. And when we learn Torah, we fill our lives with Hashem's light. And that light lights up the path in our lives, and we know what to do, and we know how to go about it, and it gives us direction for our lives. And so each and every single day, we need that light in our lives. And today, during this time of Corona and what the world is going through, we need the light of Hashem's Torah in our lives more than ever before. And so that's why I want to really encourage as many people as possible to join in, to commit to learning Torah each and every single day. Learn Rambam, which is the writings of our Torah. That's one dimension of it, but such an important one. And I'm happy to be participating myself, and I'm looking forward to my own learning in this. And I know that on a personal level, with all of the challenges that I face on a daily basis, and I know personally over the last few months, it's been such a difficult time for me personally as in the position in order to help and guide the community during this time. And for me, my clarity, my sense of inspiration, my sense of balance, my sense of light and positivity comes from Hashem's Torah and the opportunity and the gift to be able to learn it each and every single day. And I make sure to set aside time to learn each and every single day, because I know without that, my life doesn't have the light and the balance and the direction that only Hashem can provide. So learning Torah each and every single day is the greatest gift. And it's such an honor to participate in the celebration of the Siyum, of this completion and the rededication of so many people to continue learning. Let's all get involved. Let's all learn each and every single day. And may the light of Hashem's Torah light up our lives and our world, and may Hashem bless our community, our country, and our world with light and with healing and with refuah and with only blessings. So go with success and abundance, each and every single person who participates, and bring the light of Hashem into your lives. God bless you, and thank you for this opportunity to participate this evening.
Great, thank you, Chief Rabbi. My name is Sean Mattison. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me start, first of all, by wishing a tremendous mazel tov to everyone who's completing the Siyum. Just a few words and thoughts from me. As each of us embark on our own Jewish journey, in my mind, and reflecting partly on what the Chief had to say, there really are three pillars of our Jewish journey: that of doing, that of community, and that of learning. Doing really speaks for itself. At the end of the day, as the Chief Rabbi said, we don't bring a light unless we do things. But really doing in absence of community, of the people around us, our family, our friends, our Jewish community, the broader South African community, lacks something. At the same time, if we don't focus on the learning, the why, the how, the what, thousands of years of study that our sages have put together, really we don't know exactly what to do. And so these ideas of doing, learning, and community are completely symbiotic. On their own, they don't really have substance, but together they feed on each other and allow us to grow and strengthen our Jewish journey. So on the subject of learning, about 6 months ago, in what feels like a completely different world, I had the privilege to complete a Siyum Hashas. I completed the Daf Yomi cycle, 7.5 years of learning a page of Talmud, or a double-sided page of Talmud, every day. And this was an extraordinary personal experience for me. And I wanted to share with you 3 things that have taught me about learning. The first and the most important one is to establish a goal. If we want to embark and enhance on our learning, it's important for us personally to understand what we want to achieve. Set out a goal, whether it's to cover a breadth of material, to improve our skills, to focus on one thing. A goal is central. The second is to commit to ourselves, to commit to our family, and as best as possible to commit publicly. And what's so powerful about a daily program that tens of thousands of Jews around the world are learning is that we commit collectively. And the third is this habit of daily learning, is to get into the habit of learning, the habit of growing, to find time every part of the day, whether it's sneaking a few minutes here, thinking about when you're going to do it. We've all got free time during the day, but it's establishing that habit of daily learning that becomes so powerful. And what is remarkable and what I've learned is through this process of daily learning, we cover a tremendous amount of material. As we look back, we can really make real progress, even if we're taking on small bite chunks every day. And so this process, just to share 3 things that I learned having traversed the Talmud in a very elementary way, really I learned 3 things. The first is the power and the importance of our physical and experiential Judaism. As you think about it, the 2,000 years ago, the extent to which the temple, sacrifice, the physical experience of Judaism is so central to who we are, and we should never forget that. The second is the breadth of what Rabbinic Judaism covers and what's in the Talmud. From what I would argue 2,000 years ago were the first lessons in financial controls in Shekalim, to the critical importance of our words when it comes to Nadarim, to the complexity of Eruvim over Shabbos, to how we treat ourselves, how we look after our goods. The breadth and depth of the material that's out there is quite extraordinary. And the third part is that while the Chief Rabbi spoke, the act of learning itself has something special in it. What I've seen is the more we engage in the depth of scholarship and trying to understand, it really brings us in touch with the divine nature of things. To think about the complexity of the Talmud 2,000 years ago and the breadth of depth of what it covered, it's hard to come to any other conclusion but of that of its divine origin. And so what's happened to me going forward as we completed the Siyum, many people choose to do it again. At a personal level, I chose not to do it again. And I chose 2 important goals. The first was to continue, well, on both of them is to continue on daily learning. But the first was to focus on the Tanakh. People call us the people of the book, but many of us don't know what the book is. So I've embarked on learning a chapter of the Tanakh every day using a tremendous resource out of Israel 929. And the second was to focus on the learning of the Rambam. And the learning of the Rambam, as has been stressed, really for me personally builds on the underpin of the Talmud and the depth of the Torah. Personally, I'm a rationalist, and I relate to the Rambam and think there's a remarkable sense of what he's done and what he's achieved. But perhaps the most important idea is what's been spoken of. Just to digress for a moment, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes a lot about the difference between optimism and hope. And he defines optimism as a passive act, that you really hope, you expect something positive to happen, and you have a positive outlook, but you don't do anything about it. Whereas hope is a much more active act. So it's not only having a positive outlook, it's actually doing everything you can to achieve it. And so for me, as the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke about, this idea of unity is so central. But building on the analog of Rabbi Sachs, if we can focus on active unity, if we can actually take a fundamental step and together with tens of thousands of Jews, continue to learn and grow and embark on our Jewish journey and learn a chapter of the Rambam a day, I think there's no doubt that we will grow personally, we'll grow as our community, and we'll make a special contribution to the world around us. So thank you very much for listening, and I'd like to hand over to Tanya.
Hi everyone, it's really great to be here with you all tonight. My name is Tanya and I'm a digital advertising professional. I'm a wife and I'm a mother of 2 small children. And I'm also a convert to Orthodox Judaism. I began my conversion 8 years ago under the Beth Den of Johannesburg, with my introduction to Torah and my foundations of Jewish learning really guided by these esteemed Rabbonim. In essence, I spent the first 30 years of my life without a Jewish education or without Jewish day school, to now grappling daily with the boundless concepts of Torah. So you could say that my views of Judaism are like that of a child's mind, curious and hopeful. Today, I'm going to share with you my personal experience of committing to the daily study of the Rambam. In its simplest form, the Rambam in my life is a morning email of the mitzvah of the day. A couple of weeks ago, I joined the cycle of the third level of the Rambam study as instituted by the Rebbe for every day to learn a portion of the Sefer HaMitzvot, or the Book of Commandments, because this will enable me to learn all 613 mitzvot in a little less than a year. The Sefer HaMitzvot was not only written before the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, but actually serves as a framework for it, therefore giving me these immediate bite-sized snippets directly into the Torah. I often have to say that the daily mitzvot are filled with large concepts that I don't understand immediately, but they do often leave me asking questions. But this one simple mitzvah of the day is so much bigger than just me. It's not only about seeing and learning words of Torah from one of the greatest Jewish philosophers and teachers to have ever lived, but it's also the opportunity for the global Jewry to learn those exact same verses every single day, therefore powerfully uniting Jews all over the world. And I've got to be honest, life is hectic. I have 2 small little children under the ages of 5, a full-time job in advertising, and often feel deeply overwhelmed and fall into this rat race of life and battle to cling to my Jewish identity and continue to learn. But then I zoom out and I look at it from a global perspective. And I remember and I realize that Jews today, like right now, can openly learn and share in words of Torah every single day. When we look back in history at the Rambam and how he fled persecution and yet managed to create this exceptional body of work, it's just incredible that, you know, today Jews can learn so freely. And that's not even bringing into the fact that the digital age has now left us being able to connect with Shiurim, Chabad.org, H.com, Rabbonim. Our Jewish community is just one click away. So I really think that we cannot take for granted the space and time to learn Torah, especially with the devastating undercurrent and the rise of anti-Semitism that sometimes bubbles beneath the surface. So this one little daily email for me is a portal into Jewish identity and Jewish unity. As Sean was saying, you know, Jewish unity, unity for me is connection. From my personal experience, I've seen the daily Rambam email lead to WhatsApp groups, phone calls, many dial or rabbi moments, as well as really meaningful conversations around the dinner table as well as boardroom table, all around Torah. Unity drives purpose. There's something to waking up first thing in the morning and starting your day with this mindset and this intention of learning Torah, just a little bit. So for me, it's about showing up every day. It's about showing up for me. It's about showing up for God, for my family, for the Jewish community. We're just trying to do a little bit better and be a little bit better every single day. And this unity brings this energy of belonging. Learning the Rambam is a 1-year cycle. So just like precious milestones or birthdays that come around every year. And when I started to think more about it, I found that there are actually countless cycles and routines in Judaism, from waking up first thing in the morning and saying Modeh Ani, to the daily davening routine, to the weekly parsha, to the monthly lunar calendar, to the yearly Yom Tovim, to the 7 yearly Daf Yomi. The list is endless, all proving that the Torah is a perfect circle, that there is no beginning or end. You just have to start. So I'll close with my more spiritual experience of the Rambam, in which I learned that he actually introduces the Mishnah Torah from a verse from Tehillim, Psalm 119, verse 6. It goes like this: "Az lo evosh v'habiti al kol mitzvotecha," then I will not be ashamed when I gaze at all of your mitzvot. Learning this really struck at my heart because it validated this whole concept of Jewish unity and belonging for me. To not be ashamed is to truly be vulnerable and wholehearted, to show up just as you are, no matter where you are in your journey in life. And when I imagine and picture, what learning the daily Rambam really looks like, I love to imagine thousands of Jews, Jewish families, Jewish children, all learning the mitzvot, huddled over Sefer HaKodesh, talking, connecting, sharing in words of Torah. So to sum up my learning experience of the Rambam in one sentence, unity is connection. Having unity creates purpose, and living with unity is an energy of belonging. Thank you for listening to me. It's been an honor. And from here, I'm going to hand over to Jeff Seidel.
Jeff?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yeah, start.
Thanks so much. Thank you for the invitation. One good thing about COVID-19 is that we all seem to have a lot more time on our hands. Just about every day, I would spend approximately 15 minutes on a WhatsApp video call with Rabbi David Masinta, and we would discuss thoroughly the ethics of the fathers. He would encourage me to read more Tehillim, and I would get the email of the Rambam explanation of the mitzvah of the day. Also, 25 years ago, he got me to get back to putting on tefillin, which I do every day. Thank you, Rabbi. The more I read about the Rambam, the more fascinated I became. He was really a remarkable man. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, and the Rambam, he was a rabbi, a physician, a philosopher, and a community leader. He was born in Cordova in Spain, and in fact, I've spent some time there, and the people of Cordova were actually very happy that they had someone as eminent as he was to have been born there. Got born in either 1135 or 1138, wherever I was looking had a different date. His father was a judge in the Jewish court. Unfortunately, his mother died when he was still quite young. They could trace their family tree back to King David. Cordova at that time was the intellectual center of that whole region. When he was 13, a radical, ruthless Islamic group called Almohades took over Cordova. They were totally intolerant. They gave 3 choices to the people of Cordova: convert to Islam, death, or expulsion. They chose to leave, and they were unsettled for almost 11 years, spending time in lots of Spanish, southern Spanish towns, while they were trying to find where they eventually wanted to settle. They eventually landed up in Fez in Morocco, and all was good there. Until 6 years later, a rabbi that was working with the Rambam was executed for being a Jew. They then left, and they spent 2 months in the Holy Land before settling in Egypt, which was a moderate, tolerant Muslim country, no problem with academia and religion. He was exceptionally busy with his writings at this time. His brother, Rabbi David, was very successful in trading diamonds with India, and he looked after all the families financially, so that the Rambam was able to do what he did best. Rabbi Maimon, the father of Rambam, dies soon after they arrive in Egypt. And a couple of years later, his brother David drowns in a shipwreck, and his entire fortune goes down with him. Now he has become the breadwinner. He's heartbroken, ill, and penniless. Torah work was an honor, but it paid no money. Fortunately, he had studied medicine and had become a physician. In fact, he was a highly successful and renowned physician. He became the physician of the Sultan Saladin and the royal family in Egypt. His reputation spread, and he received an offer from King Richard the Lionheart to be his personal physician in England. He turned it down, deciding to stay on in Egypt. Soon after that, he became head of all Egyptian Jewry, in fact, the chief rabbi, and with this position, protected the Jews throughout the Islamic world. He also, this is what I also found interesting, he wrote extensively on medical matters and also composed an oath for all physicians, Jews and non-Jews. The Rambam considered the art of healing a sacred calling. He took care of all, Jews, non-Jews, rich, poor, noblemen or peasants. In the mid-20th century, an historian, Waldemar Schwarzenmeyer, said of Maimonides or Rambam, his medical teachings are not antiquated at all. His writings are in fact in some respects astonishingly modern in tone and contents. As a philosopher, because of his unique style and clarity, he became known as the Golden Tongue. He would also say, Jewish law aims at two things, improvement of body and improvement of soul. He married very late in life, and he had a son, Abraham, who became a rabbi as well. In fact, the Rambam was in his late 50s when Abraham was born. He died before he was 70 in Egypt and was buried in Israel. Now, another interesting side of the Rambam that I didn't know until I started reading up and checking is his amazing quotes. I'm sure the first one everyone knows. Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. He had a couple of others too. No disease that can be treated by diet should be treated with any other means. Or anticipate charity by preventing poverty. Or the risk of a wrong decision is preferable to the terror of indecision. And teach your tongue to say, I do not know, and thou shalt progress. And we must accept that truth comes from whatever source it comes from. And the very last one, which I found interesting, do not consider it proof that because it is written in books, for a liar who will deceive with his tongue will not hesitate to do the same with his pen. Pretty good. Lastly, at the conclusion of the Rambam's discussion on the laws of Hanukkah, he asks, if a person has the means to perform one of two mitzvahs, lighting the Shabbos candle or a Hanukkah lamp, which one has priority? And the answer is, the Shabbos candles. It generates peace and light within the home. Peace is great. Indeed, the entire Torah was granted to bring about peace in the world. The Hanukkah lamp, on the other hand, is lit outside. It is intended to illuminate our environment and brighten the darkness of the night. On the invitation of this event, under my picture, it said property developer. So I thought it would be prudent of me to at least once mention property. Well, that once is home, where the light of the Shabbos candle was lit. Thank you very much for listening. I'd like to now call on the next speaker, Professor David Sevat.
Dr. Zeffert, if you could unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Are you?
Yes, we can.
Good. I intend to say something about confessions. So it's not inappropriate for me to confess to a rather unfortunate weakness. I enjoy watching police dramas, American police dramas on television. I don't know if any of you share this weakness, but if you do, you would be familiar with a typical scene. The suspect is arrested. The detective in charge turns to a subordinate and says, "Mirandize him and send him off." Mirandize. It is a word that refers to a great case, Miranda versus Arizona. It was a case that concerned a fundamental of Western justice, or at least of Anglo-American justice, the need to defend. A lonely man, face to face in isolation with an interrogator. It flows from the realization that without giving protection to such a person, there can be no real justice. And as a concomitant of that is the need to supply a person in that position with legal defense. Now, if you read the judgment, it is enlightening to see that right at the beginning of the judgment of Chief Justice Warren, there is a footnote. And the footnote refers to the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, to the Tractate Sanhedrin 9b, and also to the Rambam. It also cites Choshen Mishpat, the fourth of the Arba Turim. It's the fourth to the portion dealing with Edut. And as you all know, that is a work where the views of the Rambam are often cited and compared. Now, if one looks to what the Rambam said, he started with a speculation. Why should we not admit confessions? He asks the question. And he speculates on the reason. He says that men, in the desperation of their souls, even although they are innocent, may confess to crimes that they have not committed. In other words, it's unreliable. And then he says something of great, great significance. Following on the speculations, he says, it is a commandment from the king, the divine king. I shall return to this. Now, not everyone believes, not every legal system believes in the protection of an accused person from facing interrogation or of torture. A number of years ago, I was engaged in translating a book along with Professor von Warmela of Pretoria University and Professor Veenstra of Leiden, of a compendium of cases collected by a Chief Justice of Holland shortly before and up to the time of the French Revolution. And it amazed me to come across a case in which the following happened. A young man had gone off to the East, made money, returned to Holland, and there had the misfortune of falling in love with a person who was labeled as a woman of the town. Well, his money ran out, and so did the love of his life. And lo and behold, he was walking on the streets of The Hague when he saw her with a new lover. He drew his rapier, aimed at the new lover, missed the new lover, and hit his former mistress. And the Chief Justice records that she then gave up her miserable soul on the gutter. Now, he was apprehended, and immediately on being apprehended, he confessed to his crime. He was sentenced to having his head chopped off. The prosecutor was outraged at the irregularity of the accused not having been put to the torture. What was the use of a confession that had not been obtained by torture? And so the matter was referred to the Hoge Raad, who agreed to the fact that there had been a grievous misdirection and sent the matter back with a direction that he be put to the torture so that reliable evidence could be obtained. Now, this is monstrous to our understanding. But you know, until the British came to South Africa, torture was part and parcel, certainly before the French Revolution, of judicial process. And the pursuit of confessions by these judicial means was what was sought. Now, if one compares the humanity, the wisdom, the soundness in morality of the Jewish law, certainly it goes without saying that that kind of procedure is completely unacceptable. But if we turn now to the Anglo-American law, the Anglo-American law of evidence, and the words of the Rambam, one can see that actually the Rambam was ahead of his time, and that it took the English law and the American law until the latter half of the 20th century to catch up to the position, to where the Rambam had been almost a millennium before, 800 years before. Let's go back to what I said initially. First of all, there was his speculation relating to uncertainty. And then his clarification, as it were, that the fundamental reason was that it was a commandment from Hashem. Now, if you read the whole in the totality, as a totality, you will see that it is not merely because confessions can be unreliable that we exclude it then. But if something emanates from a commandment, a divine commandment, it must of necessity import a whole moral system. A moral system in which civilized values are appalled by the tainted fruits of violence, cruelty, and deceit. Now let us turn to the development of the English law of evidence which we have received here. In England, the theory developed and certainly prevailed during the 18th and the 19th, for most of the 20th century, that confessions are excluded on the basis that if violence or cruelty is used to them to obtain them, there is a risk that they may be unreliable. Now, that may seem adequate, but in fact it's not. Let's take a case of where a policeman tricks an accused, an arrested person, into making a statement. He says to him, look, I'll give you a promise. I'm not after you. I want to get someone else. If you tell me the truth, if you tell me what you did, I really want to get so-and-so, and you will be given an indemnity against prosecution. The policeman has got no desire at all, no ability at all to carry out the promise. In those circumstances, the likelihood is that the arrested person will say something which is likely to be truthful and reliable. If in order to get an indemnity, he is required to tell the truth, he will tell the truth because it will be harmless to him. Therefore, it follows that since such a statement would be reliable, and because the principle for exclusion is based upon reliability, that such evidence can be received. Now, it was only in the latter quarter of the 20th century that this view, both in America and later in England, was seen to be inadequate. The Rambam had foreseen the problem because, as I said, the necessary implications of what he said was that you cannot receive confessions because they are repugnant to the moral order, a fortiori, if they were obtained by violence, deceit, or fraud, nothing could be worse than to receive them. That is the necessary implication of our law. South Africa, I may say, got over the problem before they did in England, because in the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act 31 of 1917, we introduced the idea that a confession could not be received if it was obtained by undue influence. So the Rambam on this point, and the Jewish law in general, was far ahead of the developments of our law, in my view, and is more than modern. It is remarkably prescient. I want to give another example of his modernity. And for this, I'll be very, very brief. The subject is dealt with in great detail in a splendid book by our chief rabbi, Rabbi Warren, who is here with us tonight. And that relates to the question, can a man rape his wife? It is certain, as our chief rabbi points out, that in this area, the views of the Jewish law and of the Rambam coincide with the demands of feminism. Now, raping one's wife is not a listed, categorized criminal offense in Jewish law. But that does not mean that it is permissible. It is, in fact, as the Rambam says, wrong. It is a wrongful act for a man to have sexual congress with his wife against her will. Now, if I tell you that in South Africa, in 1993, 3 judges sitting in appeal considered the Roman Dutch law as applicable in the Ciskei and came to the conclusion, although it was an anachronism, the rule was that a man couldn't be convicted of raping his wife. And it took a statute, an act of parliament in that year to declare that it was a crime. In England, in the same decade, the same conclusion was reached. And in America, also was one state limping after the other towards that end. In other words, there couldn't be a clearer case of showing how the innate qualities, the morality, the wonderful, wonderful modernity of the views of the Rambam. It's just not something to brush aside. It is something which gives me personally, at this time of terrible insecurity, the thought that I and others are the heirs of a great tradition, a tradition of humanity and compassion and intellectual brilliance, of spiritual insight, of divine faith, which originated in the Torah, of which our people, we Jews, were part from the time when the inhabitants of the British Isles were running around with their faces painted blue and their victims waiting human sacrifice, caged in wicker cages. And that thought gives me strength. It gives me comfort to think of that I and all of us Jews, living in a nation apart from the other nations, are the heirs to this faith and this tradition, and to this feeling. I owe so much gratitude to our sages and to the great Maimonides. Thank you. I now have the honor to pass the matter over to Rabbi you'll forgive me, Levi Silman.
Thank you very much, Professor. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the Siyum Harambam. The Siyum is the conclusion of learning, and it's a very auspicious moment. The Rambam, as we know, has written a number of books, including his commentary on the Mishnah, the Guide to the Perplexed, but what we celebrate tonight is the conclusion of his magnum opus, the Mishnah Torah, which is the entire oral Torah, the halakhic aspect of it. And as Rabbi Avson explained, it doesn't only refer to the laws that are applicable in today's days, but it also talks about the temple sacrifices, the temple order, and the coming of Mashiach. So we're going to make a Siyum, and the Siyum is very special because it's a threefold Siyum. It's a Siyum for those that learn 3 chapters a day, for those that learn 1 chapter a day, and for those that learn the daily mitzvah. The Rambam ends with his Laws of Kings, and that is chapter 12, the Laws of Kings. He ends that in the Messianic era, there will be neither famine or war, envy or competition. For good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. Therefore, the Jews will all be great sages, and we will know the hidden manners. Grasping knowledge of the Creator according to the full extent of the human potential, as it says in Isaiah chapter 11, the world will be filled with the knowledge of the Almighty as the waters cover the ocean bed. That is the conclusion of the Maimonides, of his Mishnah Torah. It's customary that when we conclude learning, we begin once again. And we do that, for example, on Simchas Torah, when we conclude reading the Torah in Vezot HaBracha, the last parsha, we immediately begin again from Bereshis, because we're never really done. We always begin again when we have just concluded. So we're going to start the new cycle again, and that begins with the laws of the foundations of the Torah, Yesodei Torah, chapter 1. The Rambam writes, the foundation of all foundations and the pillar of wisdom is to know that there is a primary being who brought us all into existence. All the beings of the heavens, the earth, and what is between them came into existence only by the truth of the Almighty Being. And the Rebbe points out that in the very basic work of Kabbalah, called Sefer Yetzirah, it says that the beginning is wedged to the end and the end to the beginning. So we see that the very end of the Rambam and the very beginning of Rambam, after all 982 chapters, the Rambam begins and ends with the concept of knowledge. He says that the foundation of all foundations is to know that there is a God, to know, that is the beginning. And the end, he quotes the verse from Isaiah that when Mashiach comes, the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Almighty, just like the water covers the ocean bed. So we see that the entire concept is knowledge. And this is something which will be most prevalent in the Messianic era. The Rebbe also goes on to explain that when it says there'll be no more war and no more hunger and competition, it doesn't only mean that in the ordinary sense, but it also means it in the spiritual sense, that we'll no longer be hungry for knowledge because we will already be filled with knowledge. We won't have competition within ourselves. We won't be dichotomized because we will be so well versed and so knowledgeable of the Almighty that there'll be no jealousy or competition between scholars, because everybody will be so involved in the pursuit of the knowledge of Hashem that there'll be nothing else that we would desire at that point. Now, from a personal point of view, the study of Rambam is something which I enjoy immensely. Anybody knows that if you study Rambam daily, you already have a very good concept and grasp of any halachic concept. So if you're ever in a Talmud shiur, or you go to any shiur, or you're debating any rabbi, if you learn Rambam, you will already be able to follow the conversation and be involved in the discussion, because the Rambam literally covers every single topic of halacha. Teaching Rambam is also something which is very inspiring. And another personal story is that a year ago, I began teaching Rambam, and every night I prepare it and I send my voice note about 1 a.m, so people have it when they wake up. And the first time I did that, about a year and a half ago, I went to a Siyum Sefer Torah the next day for the Authors Roadshow, and they were writing a new Torah after their Torahs tragically burnt in a fire. And as I came up to write a letter, the sofer said to me, would you like to write the letter Hey in the word Hayad HaChazakah? Now, those who are familiar with Rambam know that the Yad HaChazakah is another name for the Rambam's work. The Yad HaChazakah means a strong hand, and it's a word in the last verse of the Torah. And as I was filling in those words, I took that as a very special sign from above that learning and studying and teaching Rambam will not only be rewarding in the next world, in this world, we will very likely see good things that happen. It will give us direction. It will give us meaning and fulfillment that we don't see in any other way like we see in the study and in the teaching of Rambam. So I encourage all of you who have not yet been learning to begin, and those who are learning but not yet teaching should begin teaching. And this day is also a very special day. We're going to the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day, but our sages teach us that when Mashiach comes, the fast days will be transformed into days of rejoicing. So it's a day that we, please God, will not have to fast, because the Mashiach will already be here before tomorrow, and the days of fasting will be transformed. Not only will they no longer be fasting, but there will also be days of transforming. So please God, this should happen very soon. Also, I just want to say that it is also my grandfather's yard site, Reb Moshe Dov Ber ben Reb Yaakov Eliezer, who was a Rav in Minnesota for 30 years. He was the original Rabbi Solomon. And please God, we should have the Mashiach come, and this Siyum Harambam should be the last one in exile. Thank you. Rabbi Kievman, please continue with your words.
Thank you. On behalf of everyone here today, I would like to thank each of our fascinating speakers, Chief Rabbi Goldstein, Rabbi Aftzon, Sean Matheson, Jeff Zeidel, Tanya, Professor Zeffert, and Rabbi Silman for taking the time to speak to us, your insights into the importance of Rambam in our time and how studying it impacts the lives of so many people was truly uplifting. We've all learned important lessons, so thank you very much. And I'd say especially these days where the world and each of us can truly benefit from healing. The Talmud tells us that there are 83 types of illnesses and breakfast heals them all. And interestingly, Rambam is divided into 83 sections, providing us daily spiritual nourishment for both our physical as well as our spiritual well-being. So I would like to direct you all to our website, www.chabadsadafrica.org, where you can find many resources and options for studying Rambam. And one of my personal beauties about our virtual platform is that our teachers work around your busy schedule. I have this every day. The best part of it is you can control the pace of your classes. You could rewind it. You could speed it up as you like. So my friends, go ahead, set up your study session of Rambam for good health and so many brachas. Thank you all for joining us.